Hey everyone, RogueGold here, and today I want to talk about Descent. I spent a lot of time with this game mode over the past weekend while the first phase of the Year 5 Season 1 PTS was active, and like many, I think the mode has huge potential. It's got a very solid foundation and an extremely addictive hook, and I think with the right changes, this mode could easily become one of people's favorites from the franchise. So I'm really hopeful that the devs are willing and capable to evolve and iterate this experience for subsequent PTS phases and the full release in June, because I truly think this could be a really successful mode and provide a lot of longevity for the game in Year 5. So I want to dish out as much constructive feedback in this video as I can because I want to and genuinely think that Descent can succeed big time. So these will be some of my thoughts of the game mode's presentation in Phase 1, going over what I liked, didn't like, and where I think improvements could and should be made. If any of you had a chance to play the PTS or just have thoughts after watching content on it from these past few days, be sure to leave it down below. But without further ado, let's get into this. Alright, so let's start with what I really like about Descent, because there are two things in particular that I absolutely love. The first is the lore, setting, and theme. Thematically, I genuinely think Descent is the best presented game mode in the Division's history, right up there with Survival. The premise of this whole experience being a simulation is super cool to me. I know some don't love it, but I absolutely do. It allows them to do some really neat stuff with the level design, especially in the Nemesis encounter room, and overall the whole presentation is super cohesive and works towards immersing you in that simulation type experience. So like I said, right alongside Survival, in my opinion, Descent is the most thematically consistent and strong mode we've ever seen the Division put out. And so we'll touch on this in a minute, but a good amount of my feedback is going to revolve around the devs leaning as far into the idea of this being a simulation as possible, because I think they're holding back a lot in that regard. Secondly, and this one is pretty obvious, the entire premise of making builds via talents and building up your power in that way is absolutely epic. It is unimaginably fun to combine these exotic talents, stack regular talents, and just hand tailor the experience of the mode to how you want to play. Could there be some refinement there to create an overall better experience? Yes, and again, we'll talk about that momentarily, but at its core, the progression loop they've created here is flawless, in my opinion. Alright, so let's move on to some more constructive points here, because like I said, I love a lot of what is here, and I want to focus on how I personally think it could be improved. And the first point I want to touch on is the rewards for this mode, because I still see a lot of people spreading misinformation here saying that Descent grants you 0 rewards, and that is not true. The truth about the reward system, and I will link a source for this in the description below, is that whatever reward structure is planned for Descent was not present in this phase of the PTS, but will be added in a subsequent one. And this includes both XP for our characters and loot rewards for you to take back to the main game. So on this point, I don't think it's very worth mine or your time discussing it, because we have not seen what the devs' existing plans for it are, but honestly, I'm not too concerned either way, because that stuff can easily be increased or decreased down the line. The other part of the rewards for this mode that I want to highlight is something more interesting, and I also think that many miss this, because in the patch notes for this PTS phase, it says, and I quote, "Continue your run after defeating the Nemesis and see how far you can go for exclusive leaderboard rewards. Discover the history of the simulation and Ortiz Robotics' connection to the Division and the Black Tusk each week in your collectibles menu." Okay, again, I'm not sure how many read that or not, but I find this to be very interesting. Firstly, the weekly comms to be collected, super cool. Got no feedback on that, but I think having a reason to jump in once a week and get a run done, maybe you get a collectible once you defeat your first Nemesis of the week, totally on board with that, love it. That second part though, exclusive leaderboard rewards, this is where I think Descent has a real chance at providing that replayability and that motivating experience for more hardcore players to stick around long term. The way they phrase that very much reminds me of the original form of global events back in the Division 1, where they had 3 new masks for each GE, and you only earn them if you scored high enough on the leaderboards for the week the GE was active. The majority of people would get the third mask just by playing, then you had to be, moderately competitive to get the second, and only the very dedicated were able to get the first. And that was a super cool thing for the game to have. It didn't block anybody from gameplay affecting stuff, it was all cosmetic, but it gave players a reason to put their effort and performance in beyond just seeing their name on a list. And if Descent can offer a similar incentive, again, we'll need to see exactly what their plans are, I think that could be extremely motivating and fun to have in the game. Imagine they have one full outfit planned for each season of Year 5, and you earn the various pieces of that outfit depending on how high you are on the leaderboard for Descent by the end of the season. That would be epic. Here's the problem. In its current form, that dream is completely and utterly unachievable, because in my opinion, the difficulty scaling of this mode is totally off. If you tuned into any Twitch streams, or maybe you saw run breakdowns posted on Reddit, people like Solid FPS and many others were easily able to get level 40, 50, 60, because once you pass I don't know, level 20, you're practically unkillable. The amount of power we're able to obtain as players there is so great, and the game just doesn't have a way to offer you a challenge that can knock you down, so that suddenly the idea of this mode being a leaderboard driven, super intensive and competitive experience is just going to turn in who's able to play in one session for the longest, right? I think Solid tapped out in the 60s because he'd been going for 12 or more hours. He was unable to die unless he's literally just standing there and did nothing. And I think that's a huge shame. Like I said, primarily because of the potential this mode has to create a really compelling challenge around those leaderboard rewards. It's not who can make it the farthest, it's who can play for the longest, and that's no fun. So, how do we fix it? Obviously, I'm sure there are many different ideas and perspectives here, but let me offer mine. I think the factors contributing to this effect are a combination of things, but I think targeting two areas in particular could greatly help improve the challenge of the mode. One is the threats the mode is presenting you, and one is player power. Let's start with the threats. The simple fact here is, and I alluded to this earlier, I don't think the devs are leaning nearly far enough into the idea that this is a training simulation. The trailer for this mode, one of my favorite parts is when the narrator says, "The Division has trained you to operate at your limits, this simulation will push you beyond them." That's such a good concept, until you're sitting there shooting a regular red bar squad of True Sons in a regular room. Now look, I'm not expecting the devs to go out and create whole new enemy types and new abilities and attacks and whatnot. That is a lot of work, and clearly they've already put a lot into this. However, I do think there are a number of ways that could enhance the physical threats we're facing. For one, the NPCs. I've seen a few people point this out already, but look at what the summit does. In there, you come across those, what do they call them, unusual fire teams, where it's just like all robo-dogs or True Sons with flamethrowers or whatever the case is. Put some variety into the enemy combinations we're facing. It's a simulation. Have there be a chance for a room to just spawn like 20 cleaner rushers with axes and see what you gotta do. That's the whole point. It should be incredibly unpredictable. Give random enemies foam launcher guns. Give more enemies SHD skills like bosses would usually have in missions and whatnot. Like I said, I think there are a lot of things that could be done to enhance the challenge and reduce the predictability of things, without them needing to create brand new enemy types or anything like that. I mean, even just mix in the current factions that we have. Instead of one room just spawning True Sons or just Outcasts, mix them all together and create new fire team capabilities. Secondly, I think the hazards in this mode are both vastly underpowered and vastly underutilized. For example, the EMP one is just an EMP effect in the room. The fire one just means that fire spawns in a few different spots. In some layouts that can create cool effects where it limits what routes you can take, but usually it's entirely avoidable. Have the fire dynamically move throughout the room, like in Dragon's Nest from Division 1, where it makes you move around the arena to avoid it. Have the poison gas move around for the same effect. Have the electrical shock from Countdown apply to the whole room so that you actually need to scramble to climb on top of something each time. Again, I just think there's so many ways that they can use what is already in this mode to make it far more unpredictable, far more lethal, and just plain old more challenging. Now, the other main component to talk about here, I think, is player power. Now, do not freak out. It is not my intention to remove any of the fun combinations you can make in this mode. As I said at the start, I think making these wild and wacky builds is easily Descent's biggest appeal. However, as previously mentioned, being literally unkillable is not compelling and it's not competitive. So, how do we fix that? I think the main culprit here is the fact that you can stack these talents as many times as you can. 10, I think the limit is. So not only are you getting 6 damage, defensive, and utility talents, but you can also enhance their effects 10 times over. So it's really no surprise that you become unkillable when you've got 100% rate of fire, 300% damage from unhinged, 500% weapon handling. So my solution here is to limit the amount of times that you can stack these talents. Doing so would not remove any of the functionality of the fun builds that you can currently make. You're still doing exactly the same thing, but you just wouldn't get these absurd levels of power that we are currently seeing. So setting like a, limit of 3 stacks per talent, I think that could go a long way in helping the game still be able to offer you a challenge once you hit those higher levels. The core attributes here are doubly important, where you get to enhance your damage, armor, and skill tiers however many times over that it is. Maybe also 10. I just don't think it's necessary on top of everything else. What would probably make more sense is just to provide a flat increase for each category every time you complete one level. So for, 6 times, you would get 5% damage, 5% armor, and 1 skill tier. And then once you cap it out, you're done. That way you don't see these insane unkillable levels like you're seeing now. The only other thing I wanted to point out in terms of player power is the purchasable ammo types you can buy with the Descent currency. Honestly, I just wish they weren't an option. Buying 120 rounds of shock ammo and then permanently stun-locking enemies isn't compelling. It doesn't highlight the strengths of the build you made. It just trivializes everything, especially the boss and nemesis fight. So personally, I would just get rid of all those, but at the very least, the cost needs to go up and the amount of ammo that you get needs to go way down. At a base level, those are the two things I think that the devs should really try and focus on to create a more compelling and leaderboard-driven experience, rethinking the possibilities of threats given the context of this simulation, changing enemy types, increasing hazard threat, more variability, and reducing player power in certain areas to put more focus on the builds we're creating, rather than just offering huge stat increases that trump any possible NPC aggression. Beyond that, I do think there are other things that could be looked at. Right now, at least in the early levels, it is hard for me to differentiate between easy, medium, and hard difficulty rooms. I feel like that choice should be a bit more noticeable and meaningful. I think the door spawns, could use some work. I'm not against the idea of where you can see the enemy spawn from, but when they all come out of one door and there's just one wave, it feels pretty cheap to be able to just spawn camp them. And honestly, I'll make this my final point. I think it's a shame that the Nemesis is a one-time fight. In my opinion, this could tie right into the leaderboards. The Nemesis encounter should continually reappear. Each time you defeat the Nemesis, the heat gauge goes to 0, and then you're building it back up. But each subsequent time you fight the Nemesis, there should be an additional twist, right? So the first time, it's just you and the Nemesis in the room. Cool. Then the second time, maybe it's you, the Nemesis, and a few NPCs that get spawned in. Then the third time, it's you, the Nemesis, a few NPCs, and a random hazard. And I think scaling it up like that creates both a soft and hard cap on your progression in this mode. The soft cap is hopefully created by a better difficulty curve, achieved by all the things we just went over, no more unkillable runs. But then each time you reach the Nemesis fight, it's more like a bracket. If you defeat 2 Nemesis, that should be obvious on the leaderboard. Though this person died at level 12, that probably means they got through 2 Nemesis encounters. This person got to 17, well, that means they probably did 3. And that way, the game is almost organically creating these leaderboard brackets, while also heavily spiking the difficulty for those levels. Because, man, beating the Nemesis encounter for the 6th or 7th time, that should mean something. And that's what leaderboards are all about. That's really where I focused a lot of my feedback here, is how to make the leaderboards matter more, because I truly think the idea of having leaderboard exclusive rewards is a super smart move for this mode. It creates a lot of incentive to play, a ton of longevity. But in this current phase, it means nothing because of how overpowered we are and how little Descent does to challenge you once you get higher up. The first few levels are pretty solid, I think, but still implementing some of those changes I mentioned wouldn't hurt it for the more casual players, I don't think. I guess to recap my thoughts here, my hopes for Descent are that Massive will double down on the idea that this is a simulation and go totally wild with that, creating weird and uncommon enemy compositions, increasing the ability and threat of these room hazards, and bringing down the player power just a bit in a way that actually promotes these unique builds we're able to make, instead of just providing huge stat boosts that make us unkillable. Doing that, I think, would fundamentally improve the experience of Descent, make the whole thing more competitive and more fun, and hopefully make these leaderboards mean something, because I think they totally should. That's all I've got for my Phase 1 Descent feedback, y'all. I very much hope you enjoyed. If you did, a like would be greatly appreciated on the video, and be sure to click that subscribe button as well as turning on notifications so that you don't miss out on any of my future uploads. Let me know your thoughts about Descent, whether you've played it, watched it, read about it. What do you think it does well? What improvements do you think could be made? The fact that this update isn't coming for another good 6 weeks gives me a lot of hope that substantial and beneficial changes can be made here, because like I said at the start, I think Descent has huge potential to be very successful and very popular. It just needs some tweaks and changes. But I'm going to leave it there. Let me know what you think. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one. RogueGold.